This video is to demonstrate the different sounds that you can get out of the slap head on Nautilus Flagship Cajons. Now I'm using 3 Bamboo Flagship Cajons, and I'm using bamboo because it's a really nice material for making all these different adjustments work. Some of these adjustments won't work with every kind of wood, especially birch plywood is a little bit tricky. Solid woods work well for all these adjustments for the most part. Now, my aim is to make Nautilus Flagship Cajons as versatile as possible. And what I mean by that is I want to be able to emulate the sound of Flamenco Cajons, which generally have strings and are very sensitive. Peruvian style Cajons, which don't have strings or snares and are played with a very powerful technique. And Cajons which have slap corners, which have become very popular, especially in America. Very sensitive slaps in the corners. So I'll just quickly go through and play each one and briefly explain which kind it is. And then I'll give a more in-depth demonstration of how each cajon works with that setting. So this is the one with simple slap corners, and I have the snares engaged right now at a particular setting that I like, and it sounds like this. So as you can tell, the corners have a very nice sensitive slap. I can even play it lightly with my fingers and get a distinct slap sound. And the sensitive spot is right out at the tip of the corner, as far out as you can get. It's not on the top edge so much. That's actually a sound more similar to how the cajon would sound if you had all the screws in. But instead out in the corners. And it's also not as sensitive down below. On the Flamenco Cajons, you often have the sensitive spot on the vertical edges. But as you can tell, that's more of a tonal sound on this setting. Okay. The next one over is more like a Peruvian style cajon. In this setting I'm going for what's called a galleta, which is a particular kind of slap. It doesn't actually use the snares, so while I have snares on this cajon, I have them muted right now, or adjusted so that you won't hear them at all. And instead I'm trying to get sort of a snare. It's not exactly a snare, it's a bit of a buzz of wood on wood when you hit in this top edge. So this technique is more like perhaps how you'd play a djembe. It's very loud and cutting. It's for a large group. And the bass is very, very clean on this setting. No strings, no snare buzz. And over here, this is sort of an approximation of a Flamenco cajon. See, for this setting it would be best to have strings, and you can get this setting on a Nautilus string cajon as well, but I wanted to show the exact same kind of cajon, so I used the snare cajon to approximate a flamenco. And what this is essentially the sensitive spot is all along the vertical edge. And there's a few different ways you could adjust this one. Right now I've got it to like the most sensitive setting you would ever want to do. I removed 4 screws down on each side and 1 screw on the top edge at the very extreme of the top edge. So it's like the slap corner, it's just loosened up. So when you hit a loud bass sound, you get sort of this clacky sound in there. It's a very, very sensitive setting. You can play it with the fingers. And what it enables is you don't have to move too far to get between the bass tone and the snare tone. Alright, so that's the general idea. Again, trying to be able to emulate a Flamenco Cajon, Peruvian Cajon, and one with slap corners, all in the same model. So if you buy the Bamboo Flagship Cajon or any other Flagship Cajon, you can adjust it to sound like any of these. And in addition to that, each one of them has a tonal head on the other side, which is fully glued without snares. And that's more like a Cuban style Bajo Cajon, without that retroflexive string or snares. So now I'll just show you how the snares adjust on each one just a little bit. If you had the slap corner version without any snares, it sounds like this, with perfectly clean bass. Now when we turn on the snare and set it in place, it's a fairly subtle setting where you still have a clean bass tone, relatively. And then we turn it up a bit. There's a pretty buzzy snare in there. And then almost even rattly. So this cajon is nice for percussionists who are used to playing with their fingers, like on a darbuka, or frame drums, or tabla. Because it's very sensitive and fast. Even quietly, you can get that very clear slap sound. You wouldn't want to use that technique so much with the Peruvian setting because it's really meant to be hit pretty powerfully, almost like a djembe, so it's a totally different kind of technique. And the area of sensitivity is right in here on the top edge. Essentially it's kind of like with a djembe, as if you were hitting with all four fingers right there. So you can add snares to it, even though the traditional Peruvian sound is to not have any snares. You can add a little bit in there. Or you could add a lot in there. And now this is the most complicated setting. See, you could have just a few of these screws on the vertical edge taken out, even as few as these two or these three, depending on how you want it set. So if you're somebody who's used to doing conga slaps, kind of like that sort of thing, you might only need to take out a couple, because you'll still be able to get that loud snare slap down in this range. But if you're somebody who's going to play a little bit lighter, like a darbuka player or tabla player, and you want to be able to get it down there, you need to take out a few more screws. Sometimes you can get away with just doing those four. This time I decided to take out this top one on each side, or sorry, on the top edge at the sides, there and there, and that just makes it very, very sensitive, and you'll hear a lot of that rattle in the bass as well. So it almost is kind of like that string sound on it, just from the wood itself. So you really don't need that much snare in there to make it sound like a string cajon. And this one also has kind of slight corners. If you had this screw in on each side, you'd want to play more down here rather than in the corners. So, and that's why I make the flagship the way I do, so that if people want to, they can approximate the sound of any cajon that they hear. You just kind of have to experiment with it and learn how to deal with the screws. The Bamboo Flagship Cajon, available at nautiluscajons.com.